Modern monetary theory, or MMT, is one of the most radical ideas in economics today. It makes claims that sound shocking at first, but some of them are simply true. In this video, I'm going to explain what I think MMT gets absolutely right, why it's reshaping how we understand money and deficits, but also where I think it might be missing something important. Because while MMT gives a clearer picture of how money works, I'm not convinced it tells the whole story. Modern monetary theory does at first sound almost too good to be true. It tells us that governments which issue their own currency can never run out of money, that they don't need to raise taxes first, that they don't even need to borrow. They just spend and the money is created. The implication is really striking. Taxes do not fund spending. If that's true, then the way we talk about funded spending commitments and black holes in the public finances simply doesn't make sense. These ideas radically challenge conventional economics. They go against what most of us were taught at university and what most policymakers still believe today. However, it's not just theory. The Bank of England has effectively confirmed this description of the system for a fiat currency like the pound, and they've acted on it in moments of crisis from the 2008 financial crash to COVID. There's no doubt that most of what MMT is saying is undeniable. However, I have to be honest and say that I've still been wrestling with certain aspects of these ideas. I've already made 3 videos on MMT and I'm probably going to make more. I'm on a journey working through the full implications of this. I've really appreciated the comments that many of you have provided. I'm still developing my views, but the proponents and opponents of MMT all speak with such certainty. I have to say that I'm currently in a bit of a grey area around certain aspects of it. Some parts of the MMT analysis are undeniable. MMT's description of how money is created just isn't up for debate. It's merely factual, a simple statement of how the system already works. When the government spends, it credits bank accounts with new money. Taxes and borrowing come afterwards, mopping up that money. The government doesn't literally need tax revenue before it can spend, and government deficits are effectively meaningless in the narrow sense that the government could always create money to clear them. Of course, MMT doesn't suggest that there are no limits, that there's a magic money tree, but the limits do not come about from fiscal rules on government borrowing and the level of the spending deficit. The limit is inflation, and MMT advocates are absolutely clear on this. If the government spends more than the economy can produce, more goods, more services, more workers, more infrastructure, then it pushes up prices. The policy implication is that using the budget deficit as a guide to whether government can spend or tax is misleading. We're constantly told that a deficit above a certain size is dangerous, or that once debt goes above 100% of GDP, a crisis is inevitable. But MMT insists that this is a neoliberal myth. Japan is the obvious counterexample. It's run deficits for decades. Its debt to GDP ratio is over 250%, and yet interest rates remain low, inflation low, and the government can still fund itself at will. The raw deficit number tells you very little. What matters is whether the spending pushes the economy beyond its real capacity. The key point for MMT is that if there are spare resources, government can increase spending without inflation. Taxation still matters, but in a different way, not because it funds government in an accounting sense, but because it makes government spending sustainable, and it does this in 3 ways. First, tax helps prevent inflation by pulling money out of circulation, creating space for new government spending without overheating the system. Second, tax can take money that's idle or unproductive, sitting in speculation, in land, in financial engineering, and recycle it into productive uses without increasing the total stock of money. And third, tax allows redistribution. It corrects inequality, shifting resources from where they're concentrated to where they're actually needed. and in doing so strengthens the social fabric. Up to this point, I find MMT persuasive, but I hesitate at the idea that deficits and funded spending are irrelevant for policymakers. I still have a strong feeling that the notion of funded spending still carries some value. It's not just about psychology, though psychology matters for both market confidence and public trust. There's a deeper issue of discipline. Without some balance between what comes in and what goes out, it's too easy for governments to promise everything, to keep spending without limit, and to ignore the risks of inflation or misallocation. This is where I perhaps part company with the purest MMT perspective, because in practice governments do not face a neat inflation dial that they can turn up or down. They face political cycles, vested interests, lobbying pressures, and the constant temptation to defer hard choices. Saying inflation in the limit is true in principle, but inflation is only visible after the fact. By the time it appears, it may already be too late to prevent damage. That's why I think the budget deficit, while absolutely not a hard constraint in accounting terms, remains a useful signal. It creates an external marker, a way of keeping policymakers honest. A deficit target or a sense of fiscal balance isn't an economic law of nature, but it can serve as a discipline mechanism, forcing governments to weigh trade-offs in advance rather than leaving them to markets, inflation or crisis to enforce later. And if the deficit is rising, it should act as a prompt for government to explain how today's extra spending will build tomorrow's productive capacity. Are the funds going into infrastructure, skills, healthcare, green investment, things that expand what the economy can supply and thus reduce the inflation risk? Or are they simply fueling consumption in ways that risk stoking inflation? In this sense, the deficit isn't just an abstract number. It becomes part of a story about whether spending today is laying foundations for sustainable prosperity. There's another point that triggers some doubt for me about MMT. Money itself is not a natural resource. It isn't steel or energy or labour. It's an artificial construct, a collective agreement that works only because we all accept the artifice. And that's where I think MMT perhaps risks falling into the same trap as orthodox economics. It treats money as if it were real, as if the system can be modelled and managed like a machine. But money isn't the economy. It's a tool, a way of organising relationships, mobilising resources and keeping score, which means that no economic model of money can ever represent reality. It can only represent the artifice. Perhaps the scepticism that I'm raising in this video is just the residue of the old economics that I've lived with for most of my career. But I can't shake the sense that some connection between tax and spend, however loose, is still important for credibility and responsibility. So yes, MMT definitely gives us a clearer picture of how money actually works. It frees us from the false household analogy of government needing to earn before it spends. It debunks the idea that debt to GDP ratios are a ticking time bomb. But it doesn't mean magic money. It doesn't mean the end of trade-offs. Taxes remain crucial, not just as a technical tool against inflation, but as a way of shaping the whole economy, disciplining, spending, recycling wealth and redistributing fairly. And even in an MMT world, fine-tuning isn't straightforward. We never know exactly where the limit lies. It's not a formula. It's always going to be a matter of political and economic judgment. In the end, economics is not about clever monetary tricks. It's about credibility, confidence and choices. And I'm still not ready to let go of the idea that some kind of discipline, however we frame it, still matters. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd really be grateful for that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.